The fluorescent lights of the Erewhon market hummed a sound that drilled straight into Hannah's morning-sick nausea. She was just trying to buy ginger ale and saltines when a voice smooth and mocking cut through the aisle. "Well, well, Hannah, divorce really hasn't been kind to you." She froze her hand, hovering over the crackers. It was Jack, her ex-husband, looking immaculate in a tailored suit, a tall blonde dripping off his arm. His eyes raked over her, her messy bun, her old sweatshirt, and her slightly rounded stomach. "Wow!" He sneered, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You've really let yourself go. Piling on the pounds, aren't we?" Hannah's breath hitched, a hot wave of shame and anger washing over her. The woman beside Jack, whose name she vaguely recalled as Tanya, let out a high-pitched, delicate snicker, like the tinkling of broken glass. "Jack, don't be mean," Tanya said, though her eyes were anything but kind. She adjusted the strap of her Gucci handbag, her gaze dismissive. "I'm not being mean. I'm being honest," Jack said, puffing out his chest. He was a man who feasted on the insecurities of others, and Hannah had been his primary source of sustenance for 8 long years. "I guess I got out at the right time. Can't have my wife looking, well, like that." He was fishing. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her to cry, to yell, to crumble, just as she always had. In the past, his words would have flayed her. She would have apologized inexplicably for her own existence. But today was different. Inside her, protected by the very pounds he was mocking, was a secret. A tiny flickering heartbeat that had changed everything. She wasn't just Hannah, the failed wife. She was Hannah, a mother-to-be. She looked at Jack, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his handsome, cruel face. The face she had once loved and now thankfully only pitied. She clutched the basket of ginger ale to her chest, a chest that was tender and swollen. "I'm sorry you feel the need to say that, Jack," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her knees were trembling. "Oh, a little sensitive, are we?" he pressed, stepping closer, invading her space. He smelled of expensive cologne and the same arrogance he always had. "Just a little friendly advice from your ex. Maybe lay off the carbs. You don't want to be alone and sloppy, do you?" Hannah's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. It was a barely there swell, visible only to her or to someone looking to find fault. Jack's eyes followed the movement, and a flicker of something new, confusion, then suspicion, crossed his face. But he dismissed it, mistaking her protective gesture for one of shame. "Anyway," he said, turning to Tanya, "we'll be late for our reservation at Nobu. Good seeing you, Hannah. Try to pull yourself together." He and Tanya swept past, leaving Hannah standing alone in the aisle, their laughter echoing. The humiliation was a physical thing, a heavy cloak settling on her shoulders. She wanted to slide to the floor. Instead, she took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of organic kale and stale air filling her lungs. She paid for her items, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her debit card. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, gave her a sympathetic glance. "Rough day." "You have no idea," Hannah whispered. She drove home to her small one-bedroom apartment in a modest part of Culver City. It was a far cry from the glass-walled Marina del Rey condo she had shared with Jack. Jack, a moderately successful and deeply indebted financial advisor, had lived and breathed appearances. Their marriage had been a curated Instagram feed, parties, yachts, and designer clothes, all underpinned by Jack's relentless criticism of her. He'd joked about her weight when she was a size 6. He'd suggested she'd get Botox at 30. He'd managed their finances, which he later learned meant running up massive joint debts while keeping his own bonuses in a private account. The divorce had been brutal. He'd fought her on every single thing, dragging it out until she was so emotionally and financially depleted that she agreed to walk away with almost nothing, just her freedom. She'd spent the last 6 months rebuilding. She'd gotten a job at a small independent bakery, a passion she'd shelved for Jack. She was kneading dough at 4 a.m., her hands covered in flour, and for the first time in years she felt a flicker of peace. And then 2 months ago she had met Dominic. She unlocked her apartment door, the confrontation in the store replaying in her mind. Fat, sloppy, Let yourself go. The old voices of doubt. Jack's voices swirled in her head. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, the tears finally coming hot and angry. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up. A simple text message. Landed. On my way. D. A fresh wave of tears came, but this time they were of relief. She wiped her eyes, took a long drink of her ginger ale, and went to the bathroom to wash the humiliation off her face. Jack didn't get to ruin this. He didn't get to touch this one perfect secret thing. She was pregnant. And the father was not just a man, but the man who had shown her what kindness actually was. Hannah and Dominic Winters had met in the most unremarkable way. Hannah's bakery had been hired to cater a small private fundraiser for an environmental nonprofit. It was not a lavish gala, but a quiet, serious gathering of donors at a private home in Pacific Palisades. Hannah was in the kitchen arranging pastries, her hair falling out of its clip, a smudge of flour on her cheek. A man had walked in, startling her. He wasn't in a tuxedo like the other guests. He wore a simple dark gray Henley and jeans. He looked more like a technician than a donor. "I'm sorry," he'd said, his voice quiet. "I was just looking for the coffee." "Oh, it's right here," Hannah said, gesturing to the urn. "Help yourself." He smiled a tired but genuine smile. "These look amazing," he said, pointing to her lemon thyme tarts. "Thank you, I made them." "You did?" He picked one up and bit into it. His eyes closed for a moment. This is incredible. The balance is perfect." They'd talked for 20 minutes hidden away in the kitchen while the buzz of the party continued outside. He didn't ask what she did in the grand Los Angeles sense. He asked what she liked about baking. She told him about the science, the precision, the way yeast felt alive. He listened, really listened. He told her his name was Dominic and that he was in tech. It was only when the host of the party, a well-known philanthropist, burst in. "Dominic, there you are. We're ready to hear from you," that Hannah realized. This was Dominic Winters, the reclusive founder and CEO of Aura Dynamic, a company that was single-handedly revolutionizing green energy storage. He was a man rumored to be worth north of $50 billion, a ghost who never gave interviews and whose photo was almost impossible to find online. He had given her a small apologetic smile and left to give his speech. She'd assumed that was that. An hour later, as she was packing up, he found her by her van. "Hannah," he said, using her name, "I apologize for running off." You're Dominic Winters," she stammered. "I am. And I'm also just Dominic." He held out his phone. "I meant what I said. Those tarts were perfect, and I haven't had a real conversation in a long time. Would you be willing to have another one over dinner, maybe?" Their relationship had been a slow burn. He was cautious, guarded by years of people wanting something from him. She was shattered, healing from years of Jack's emotional abuse. They met in secret. He'd come to her tiny apartment and they'd cook pasta. They'd take long walks on the beach late at night when no one was around. He was the antithesis of Jack. Where Jack was loud, Dominic was quiet. Where Jack demanded, Dominic asked. Where Jack saw her as an accessory, Dominic saw her. He loved her mind, her resilience, her passion for her simple flour-dusted craft. Then 6 weeks ago, the shock. The 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test she'd taken in the bathroom of her bakery. She had been terrified. It was too soon. It was complicated. She was a divorced baker. He was Dominic Winters. She'd told him that night, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant." He had been silent for a full minute, his expression unreadable. Hannah's stomach had plummeted. This was it. This was where the fairy tale ended. Then he had knelt in front of her, placed a hand gently on her flat stomach, and looked up at her, his eyes shining with a profound, startling emotion. "Ours?" he'd asked. She nodded, tears streaming. "Good." He breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's good. That's everything. Now 20 minutes after her humiliating run-in with Jack, she heard a key in the lock. Dominic had his own key, a symbol of trust that still humbled her. He stepped in, and the small apartment instantly felt safer. Dominic was not a physically imposing man, but he had an aura of solid centered gravity. He was back from a 3-day trip to Singapore. He dropped his bag, his eyes finding hers instantly. He read her face in a second. "What's wrong?" he asked, crossing the room, his brow furrowed in concern. She tried to brush it off. "Nothing. Just tired. How was the trip?" "Hannah." He cupped her face, his thumbs gently wiping away the traces of her earlier tears. "Don't nothing me. What happened?" The story spilled out. The market, Jack, Tanya, the words, fat, sloppy, let yourself go. Dominic's jaw tightened. A coldness she had never seen before entered his eyes. It was a still, quiet anger that was far more terrifying than Jack's loud bluster. "He said that to you." It wasn't a question. "Dom, it's fine. He's an idiot. I'm just hormonal." "No." His voice was firm. "It is not fine. It's cruel. And he's not just an idiot. He's a liability." "What does that mean?" she asked, worried. "It means—" He sighed, pulling her into a hug, his arms wrapping protectively around her, one hand splayed possessively over her lower abdomen. "It means he doesn't get to hurt you. Not ever again. I was already having my team look into him just to make sure the divorce was truly final, no loose ends." "Your team, Mr. Kincaid," he said, naming his head of security, a discreet and terrifyingly efficient man. "I wanted to be sure he couldn't trouble you, but I think it's time we expedited that." "No, Dom, please," she said, pulling back. "I don't want you to do anything. It'll just make it worse. He's nobody. He's just Jack. He's the man who humiliated the mother of my child." Dominic said, his voice low and absolute. "That makes him my problem. Now, let's get you off your feet. Have you eaten?" He steered her to the sofa, took the ginger ale from her hand, and went to the kitchen. He didn't rant or rave. He simply began making her tea, his movements precise. But Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders. Jack, in his petty, arrogant cruelty, had just made a very powerful enemy. He just had no idea. Jackery Mason felt fantastic. Bumping into Hannah had been the highlight of his week. She had looked exactly as he'd expected a woman to look without his guidance, a complete and utter mess. It validated every decision he'd made. Leaving her had been like dumping dead weight. Tanya, in contrast, was an asset. She was a model, or at least she'd told him she was, and she looked expensive, which was all that mattered. But Jack's life was not as glossy as his Patek Philippe watch, a high-quality replica, suggested. His job at the mid-level wealth management firm Peterson & Cole was on shaky ground. He hadn't landed a whale in over a year. His clients were dwindling. His commissions were drying up, and his boss, Mr. Peterson, was starting to make pointed remarks in meetings. The condo in the marina was a lease he couldn't really afford. The payments on his BMW were late. Tanya's appetite for designer labels was proving costly. He needed a win, a big one. He was at his desk nursing a post-Nobu hangover when he overheard two senior partners talking by the coffee machine. "Getting a meeting is impossible. The fund is called Aura Dynamic. They're the new gods of green tech." "Who's running it? It's all anonymous." "The rumor is, it's Dominic Winters." Jack's ears perked up. Dominic Winters, the ghost. Landing even a small piece of the Aura Dynamic portfolio would make him a legend. It would save his career. "You two talking about Aura Dynamic?" Jack chimed in, trying to sound casual. One of the partners, a shark named Bennett, gave him a dismissive look. "Don't bother Mason. That's out of your league. They're only meeting with top-tier firms. We're pitching, but I'm leading. Peterson wouldn't let you within a mile of that account. Jack's face burned. We'll see about that. He went back to his desk, his mind racing. He had to find a way in. He spent the day frantically Googling. Aura Dynamic, Dominic Winters. The search results were all the same dry press releases, stock projections. No personal information, no angle. He was about to give up when an old petty instinct kicked in. He thought of Hannah again. He'd been so pleased with her downfall. But then a nagging detail from the grocery store returned to him. The way her hand had moved to her stomach. Not shame, protection. He'd chalked it up to her getting fat. But what if on a whim he logged into an old shared cloud account? He'd set it up for her years ago and had never deleted his access. He felt a thrill of transgression. He sifted through old photos documents. Nothing. Then he saw it. A calendar sync. She'd forgotten to revoke his access. Most of it was boring. Bakery shifts, dentist, and then a recurring appointment. Dr. Howell, consultation. He Googled the name. Dr. Lena Howell, the Howell Perinatal Group, Los Angeles. Jack's blood ran cold. Perinatal. Pregnancy. His mind spun. Hannah was pregnant. That sloppy, broken woman was pregnant. He did some quick math. They'd been divorced for 6 months. She'd gotten pregnant fast. His first emotion was a bizarre spike of jealousy. Then calculation. Who was the father? Some loser baker. Some new mediocre guy. But the doctor. He clicked the link. The Howell Perinatal Group wasn't just any OB-GYN. Its offices were in a penthouse suite in Beverly Hills. It was known as the most exclusive, most expensive, most discreet practice in the city, catering to celebrities and billionaires who wanted privacy. A bakery employee couldn't afford the copay at Dr. Howell's. A new theory began to form in Jack's mind, dark and exciting. Hannah hadn't just moved on. She had landed someone rich enough to afford Dr. Lena Howell. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. She had hidden this. She had been with this new man while they were finalizing the divorce. He could argue she had hidden assets. He could contest the settlement. He could demand something. He pictured Hannah, her pale, tired face. She was weak. She'd always been weak. And now she had a secret she was clearly paying a lot of money to protect. This was leverage. He didn't know who the man was, but he didn't need to. All he needed to do was threaten to expose her. The kind of man who used a doctor that private would hate a scandal. He would pay. He would pay a lot to make the annoying ex-husband of his new girlfriend go away. Jack picked up his phone. He didn't have Hannah's new number, but he knew where she worked. He'd find her. This was so much better than landing a new client. This was a windfall. Hannah was leaving the bakery after a long shift. It was almost 8 p.m. and the alley behind the small shop was dark. She was exhausted, the pregnancy draining her energy far more than she'd anticipated. She was just fumbling for her car keys when a figure stepped out from the shadows of the dumpster. "You're hard to find, Hannah," Hannah screamed, dropping her keys. They clattered on the pavement. It was Jack. His smile was gone. His eyes were hard, glittering in the dim security light. "Jack, you scared me to death. What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, advancing on her. "No, we have nothing to talk about." She bent to retrieve her keys, but he kicked them, sending them skittering under her car. "I don't think you're in a position to say no," he hissed. "What do you want?" she said, her voice trembling. She backed up against the brick wall of the bakery. The smell of stale yeast and garbage filled her nose. "Dr. Lena Howell," he said, the name dropping into the dark alley like a stone. Hannah's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, slamming his hand against the wall just beside her head. She flinched. I know you're pregnant, Hannah, and I know you're seeing the most expensive baby doctor in California. So who is he? That is none of your business, Jack. It became my business when you were hiding a new rich boyfriend while we were still settling our divorce. You defrauded me. You were hiding assets. That's insane, she cried. I met him months after I left you. That's what you'll say. But a messy lawsuit would sound very different, wouldn't it? Broke ex-wife gets pregnant by wealthy mystery man. It's a good story. I wonder how the press would like it. I wonder how he would like it. Hannah's stomach turned. This was Dominic's worst nightmare. His privacy was the most valuable thing he owned. A scandal like this, it would be catastrophic. What do you want, Jack? She whispered, the fight draining out of her. Smart girl, he sneered, finally asking the right question. I'm in a bit of a jam. I need, let's call it a readjustment of our settlement. A one-time payment. $500,000. Hannah gasped. Jack, I don't have $5. I work in a bakery. But he does, doesn't he? Whoever he is, tell him it's the price of peace, or else I go to the media. I'll paint a very ugly picture of you, Hannah. The gold-digging pregnant ex-wife. I'm sure his very expensive lawyers will love that. You're disgusting. She spat, her anger finally overriding her fear. I'm a realist, he retorted. You have 48 hours to get me the money. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling page 6. He stepped back, admiring his work. She was terrified. Perfect. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Hannah slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She sat on the grimy pavement, her body shaking with sobs. She'd crawled out from under his thumb, and now he was back, threatening to crush not only her but Dominic as well. She finally retrieved her keys and drove home, her mind a fog of panic. She couldn't tell Dominic. He would blame himself. She didn't know what he would do, but she knew it would involve his layers of security and lawyers. It would become a situation to be handled. But she couldn't pay. She was trapped. When she got to her apartment, she saw an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street. A man in a simple suit was in the driver's seat. As she walked to her door, he got out of the car. Ms. Reynolds. Hannah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. My name is Kincaid. I work for Mr. Winters. His voice was calm with a faint British accent. It was the man Dominic had mentioned. Hello? Mr. Winters was concerned about you working late. I was assigned to ensure your safety. I've been here for an hour. He paused, his gaze sharp. My long-range microphone picked up your entire conversation with Mr. Mason in the alley. Mr. Winters has already been informed of the threat. Hannah's knees went weak again. Oh, God. Please go inside, Ms. Reynolds, Kincaid said, his voice softening slightly. Mr. Winters is waiting for you on a secure line, and let me assure you, Mr. Mason is no longer your problem. Dominic Winters did not get angry like other men. He did not yell or punch walls or make rash decisions. His anger was a drop in temperature. It was a sharpening of focus. It was the quiet, terrifying precision of a surgeon. When Kincaid patched through the audio from the alley, Dominic listened, his expression unchanging, as the man he'd never met threatened the mother of his child. He heard Hannah's fear, her choked sobs. And he made a decision. Mr. Mason's deadline was 48 hours, sir, Kincaid said over the secure line. He won't need that long, Dominic replied, his voice flat. I've seen his file. He's desperate. He's a gambler reaching for his last chip. How do you wish to proceed? A restraining order? We can have his firm's compliance department bury him by morning for ethical violations. No, Dominic said. That's not clean enough. Men like Jack Mason don't learn from being slapped on the wrist. They learn from total annihilation, and they learn best when they inflict it upon themselves. A plan began to form, one that had been germinating ever since Dominic had seen Jack's name on Kincaid's background report, a name on a list of low-level advisors at Peterson & Cole. The same Peterson and Cole that was coincidentally one of a dozen firms desperately pitching for a slot managing a small tranche of Aura Dynamics' new employee pension fund. It was a minor account for Aura, but a whale, as Jack would call it for a firm like his. "Kincaid," Dominic said. "Get me Mr. Peterson's direct line." The next day, Jack Mason felt like a king. He had Hannah trapped. The $500,000 was as good as in his account. He walked into the office with an insufferable swagger. "Peterson wants to see you," his assistant said, her face grim. Jack's stomach tightened. Had Hannah called Peterson? No, she wouldn't dare. He straightened his tie and walked into his boss's office. Mr. Peterson was a man perpetually stressed, but today he looked like he'd won the lottery. "Mason?" he boomed, gesturing for Jack to sit. This was new. "Sir, I don't know how you did it, kid, but you did it." "Sir, I'm not sure what." Aura Dynamic. They called, they won a final pitch, and they specifically asked for you. Jack's brain stalled. "Me? They asked for me?" "By name. We'd like to hear from your Mr. Jackery Mason." That's what the man said. "This is it, Jack. The big one. You are leading this pitch. It's tomorrow 10 a.m. at their headquarters in the Horizon Plaza. Don't blow this, Mason. This isn't just your career. This is the whole firm." Jack walked out of the office in a daze. They had asked for him. How had they seen his admittedly mediocre portfolio? It didn't matter. This was it. Fate. He was a winner after all. He was being recognized. He was so high on his own arrogance he didn't even consider why a multi-billion-dollar fund would personally request a failing mid-level advisor. He completely forgot about Hannah, the blackmail, the $500,000. That was chump change now. He was about to land Dominic Winter's personal account. He'd be a partner by Christmas. He spent the next 24 hours in a frenzy preparing his pitch. He was full of bluster buzzwords and baseless projections. He was going to charm the pants off this reclusive billionaire. Meanwhile, in a quiet home in the Palisades, Hannah was nervous. "Dom, what did you do?" He just stopped. "Kincaid said he hasn't tried to contact me." "I just offered him an opportunity," Dominic said, handing her a cup of chamomile tea. "What kind of opportunity?" Dominic looked at her. "The kind he can't resist. The kind that will require him to stand in a room and show us exactly who he is. Us." Hannah said, her hand going to her stomach, which was now a distinct, lovely curve under her sweater. "He's giving a presentation tomorrow, at my office, and I would very much like it if you were there." "What in the room, Dom? I can't. I don't want to see him." "You won't have to," Dominic said, his voice gentle. "There's a private observation lounge attached to the main boardroom. One-way glass. You'll be comfortable and you'll be safe. But I think after what he did, you deserve to see this." Hannah was terrified, but a small hard kernel of strength, one that had been growing with her child, nodded. "Okay, I'll be there." The Horizon Plaza was not a building. It was a statement of dominance. It was a spear of dark glass and recycled steel that pierced the Los Angeles sky so tall that the air at its peak seemed thinner, cleaner. The private elevator for the 70th floor penthouse, the exclusive domain of Aura Dynamic, moved with a silent, terrifying velocity. Jack Mason felt his ears pop. He swallowed, tasting the sour tang of nervous adrenaline. Beside him, Mr. Peterson was rigid, his face pale, clutching a leather portfolio as if it were a life raft. They were ushered out into a lobby that was more like a modern art museum. The scale was overwhelming. The ceilings were 30 feet high, and the entire west-facing wall was a single seamless pane of glass revealing a breathtaking, godlike view of the city stretching from the Hollywood Hills to the distant glimmer of the Pacific. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and old wood. There was no art on the walls, Jack realized. The view was the art. "Gentlemen, this way." A severe-looking woman with a nearly invisible earpiece led them down a long, impossibly wide corridor. Their expensive, hard-soled shoes made no sound on the floor, which was made of some dark matte material that seemed to absorb the light. Jack felt an unfamiliar smallness creeping in. His Zegna suit, which had felt like armor in the lobby of his own building, now felt like a cheap costume. The boardroom door hissed open a silent hydraulic sigh. The room was dominated by a 50-foot-long table that appeared to be carved from a single massive piece of polished black wood. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, sat at the far end, illuminated by a soft recessed light. They were the board members. They didn't look up, their attention focused on the integrated tablets before them. They radiated an aura of bored, absolute power. At the head of the table sat one empty chair, a high-backed, imposing throne of black leather and chrome. The entire far wall was the dark-tinted window Jack had seen from the outside. It felt less like a window and more like a void reflecting the room back at them. "Gentlemen," one of the board members said, a woman with sharp gray hair not bothering with introductions. "Mr. Winters is delayed. Please begin." Peterson gave Jack a sharp, "Don't you dare mess this up" look. Jack fumbled for his laptop, his hands suddenly slick with sweat. "Thank you." He began, his voice an octave higher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "It is an honor, a distinct honor to be here today. A real privilege. We at Peterson & Cole believe in the future, and you are the future." He launched into his pitch. It was the same one he always gave, full of flashy graphics. He didn't fully understand and aggressive buzzwords. Synergistic growth, next-gen leveraging, disruptive positive frameworks. He could feel himself losing them. Their expressions were blank, cold, and unimpressed. One of the men tapped a pen, a precise, rhythmic click, click, click that drilled into Jack's skull. Peterson, sensing the disaster, was starting to look rigid, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle spasmed in his cheek. Jack was 20 minutes in, sweating profusely, his words tumbling out in a desperate, meaningless stream, when the main boardroom door hissed open again. He glanced over, annoyed at the interruption. A man walked in. He was in a simple, dark gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and simple, unbranded sneakers. He looked like a lost IT guy, maybe someone from the mailroom. Jack almost scoffed. But the room's entire gravitational pull shifted. The board members who had been ignoring Jack sat up straight. Their focus became absolute. The man who was tapping his pen instantly stilled. The newcomer walked to the head of the table, his movements economical and quiet. He didn't strut. He didn't have to. He simply occupied the space. "My apologies for the delay," the man said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room, cutting through Jack's nervous rambling. "Please continue, Mr. Mason." Jack's brain stalled. He looked at Peterson, who was staring at the man with a look of terrified reverence. This was Dominic Winters, this nondescript, quiet man. He looked normal. He looked like nothing. Yes," Jack stammered, trying to find his place in his slideshow. "Yes, well, as you can see from the 5-year projection, the key indicators." "Let's stop there," Dominic said. He held up a hand. He hadn't even glanced at the screen. He was looking directly at Jack. His eyes were a pale, neutral blue, and they were terrifyingly perceptive. They weren't angry. They were discerning, like a scientist looking at a specimen on a slide. "Your projections are fiction, Mr. Mason," Dominic said, his voice still perfectly calm. "Your understanding of the green tech sector is, to be frank, insulting. Your entire pitch is based on a paradigm that was outdated 5 years ago." Peterson went white, not pale, white. "Mr. Winters, I assure you, Jack is one of our best." "His research?" "One of your best at what?" Dominic interrupted, his quiet voice cutting Peterson off instantly. "At Aura, we don't just invest in numbers. We don't care about synergistic growth. We invest in people, in character, in integrity. We invest in the kind of person who does the right thing, especially when they believe no one is looking." A cold, specific dread began to crawl up Jack's spine. This felt targeted. He tried to recover. "Sir, I pride myself on my character. My integrity it's everything to me." "Is it?" Dominic leaned forward, his hands clasping on the dark wood. "Then let's talk about your character, Jack. Let's talk about last Tuesday, around 11:30 a.m., in the Erewhon Market on 3rd Street. Aisle 4, the cracker aisle." Jack's blood evaporated. He stopped breathing. The boardroom, the city, the whole world contracted to the space between him and this quiet, intense man. He looked at Dominic Winters, and for the first time he saw him. He saw the cold, brilliant intelligence. He saw the man from the legends. I don't recall," Jack stammered. It was a pathetic lie, and the entire room knew it. "Then let me refresh your memory," Dominic said. "You were there with a woman named Tanya, and you ran into your ex-wife, Hannah. You proceeded to mock her. You called her fat. You told her she'd let herself go. You humiliated a woman who was at that very moment suffering from severe morning sickness. A woman who was just trying to buy ginger ale." The details were so precise, so exact, that Jack felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the edge of the lectern to steady himself. "And then," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "it gets worse. You didn't stop there. You accessed her private calendar. You stalked her. You cornered her in a dark alley behind her bakery. And you blackmailed her." "No," Jack gasped. Peterson made a small choked sound like a dying animal. "Oh yes." Dominic's eyes were like ice chips. "You threatened to go to the press. You threatened to create a scandal. You demanded $500,000 for your silence, all because you'd figured out she was seeing a doctor you knew she couldn't afford." Jack's world was tilting. His mind was a scramble of pure white-hot panic. How could you possibly... How do you know this?" He was pleading, though he didn't know for what. "You're wondering how I know," Dominic said. He looked at Jack, a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "You're wondering who the mystery man is, the man you thought you could extort, the father of her child." Dominic stood up. He was not a large man, but he radiated in power that sucked all the air from the room. He placed his hands flat on the table. "It's me, you idiot." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his legs giving out, and he collapsed into one of the empty chairs. I am the man she defrauded you with months after she had the good sense and strength to leave you. I am the man whose child she is carrying, the child you threatened." Jack was hyperventilating, his vision tunneling. He looked around frantically as if he could find an escape. Hannah, I'm sorry, I didn't know. It was a mistake. A joke. Please." He was looking around the room as if she might be hiding under the table. "She can't hear you," Dominic said coldly. "But she can see you." Dominic gestured to the vast dark window that had been looming over them. There was a soft click. The polarization on the glass faded, and the light inside the observation lounge behind it came up. And there she was. It was Hannah. She was standing tall, her hand resting on her pregnant stomach, which was now a distinct, lovely curve under a simple, elegant blue dress. She was not the fat, sloppy woman from the market. She was not the terrified victim from the alley. She was radiant. She was serene. Her eyes met Jack's, and there was no hatred in them, no fear. There was only a quiet finality. She looked powerful. She looked beautiful. She looked untouchable. Jack's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The humiliation he had heaped on her, the casual cruelty he had dispensed his entire life, returned to him 1,000-fold in this glass tower in front of the most powerful people he'd ever met. He looked from the ghost of the woman he'd destroyed to the billionaire who had protected her, and he finally understood. He was nothing. Dominic Winters looked at the shell of a man, then shifted his gaze to the horrified, ashen-faced Mr. Peterson. "The meeting is over." The heavy boardroom door hissed shut, sealing Jack and Mr. Peterson in the elevator. The descent from the 70th floor was perfectly silent, a smooth, soundless plunge. Jack could feel the pressure changing in his ears, or perhaps that was the blood pounding in his head. He was panting, his skin slick with a cold sweat. Mr. Peterson did not look at him. He stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of ashen, terrified fury, staring at the polished steel doors. "Sir," Jack finally choked out, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Sir, that was a setup. A complete misunderstanding. She's my ex-wife. She's manipulative. She lied to him. I can fix this. I'll call him. I'll write a letter. I'll apologize." Peterson turned his movement so sharp Jack flinched. "Apologize," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous rasp. "You don't apologize for this. You don't fix this. You're a disease, Mason. You're an infection, and you've just killed my firm." "No, sir. It's one account, a big one, but we can recover." "You still don't get it, do you?" Peterson's voice was rising, cracking with a hysteria Jack had never heard. "You think this was about one account? This was Dominic Winters. You didn't just insult him. You blackmailed his pregnant girlfriend. You stood in a grocery store and... He couldn't even say it. He jabbed a trembling finger into Jack's chest. "You called the mother of the Winters heir fat." The word echoed in the small, sterile box. "Do you know what blacklist means in his world, you catastrophic moron?" Peterson was almost screaming now. "It doesn't mean we don't get his account. It means our creditors will call in our loans by 5 o'clock. It means our top-tier clients, the ones who do business with Winters' other holdings, will have their lawyers on the phone with us by noon, terminating their contracts. You haven't just lost a whale, Mason. You've sunk the entire fleet. You've bankrupted us all. Sir, We're done!" Peterson roared, his face purple. "My company, my life's work. It's over. And you—" The elevator chimed softly, signaling their arrival in the lobby. The doors hissed open. "Get out!" Peterson spat. He shoved Jack hard, sending him stumbling onto the marble floor. "Get out! Mr. Peterson, please. Don't call me. Don't come to the office. Your access is already revoked." He gestured to the stoic security guard by the desk, who was watching with a cold, neutral expression. "If I ever see your face again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Your things will be in a box on the curb by the time you get there. You're fired." Peterson turned, straightened his tie with a sharp, violent tug, and stormed out of the building, disappearing into the glare of the morning sun. Jack was left alone in the center of the vast, echoing lobby. He was still shaking. Revoked. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out his corporate Amex. He needed a drink. He needed to think. His phone buzzed. He looked down, his hands trembling. A text from Tanya. "Where are you?" "My card just got declined at Vuitton. Fix it." The message was so trivial, so monumentally stupid in the face of the abyss that had just opened beneath him that he almost laughed. Fix it! He tried to open his mobile banking app to check his balance. Access denied. Account frozen. His firm-issued phone. His firm-linked accounts. Peterson wasn't exaggerating. He was being erased. He walked numb toward the security turnstiles, just to see. He held his building access card up to the sensor. A red light flashed. "Access denied." "You need to leave the premises, sir," the guard said, his voice no longer respectful, just firm. "Not Mr. Mason." "Sir." Jack was ushered out of the revolving doors and onto the sidewalk. The Los Angeles noise hit him like a physical blow, the horns, the sirens, the sun. He was just another man on the street, blinking in the sudden harsh light. He sank onto a hard public bench, the Zegna suit suddenly feeling like a clown costume. He was ruined. Not just in trouble, not just fired. He was ruined utterly and completely. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wax wings built of arrogance and cruelty had melted in an instant. He thought of Hannah. He saw her face, not the powerful, serene woman behind the glass, but the tired, pale woman in the grocery store, her hand on her stomach. He hadn't seen a pregnancy. He hadn't seen a person. He'd seen a target. He'd seen a weakness. He'd seen a payday. He thought back even further to the woman he'd met in college. The one who had supported him, who had believed in him, the one whose gentle, steady light he had spent 8 long years trying to extinguish, resentful that it wasn't a spotlight on him. And in this moment of total blinding eclipse, he finally devastatingly understood what he had lost. He hadn't just lost a fortune. He'd thrown away a treasure, and he'd done it for free simply out of spite. He was bankrupt in every single way a man could be. 6 months later. The air was different here. It didn't smell of diesel and hot pavement. It smelled of salt and jasmine. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean on the private beach below. Hannah was resting in a cushioned chaise lounge on a wide, sun-drenched deck. This was not a glass tower. It was a home nestled into the cliffs of a private gated community in Malibu. It was made of warm teak and natural stone, a place Dominic had designed to be sustainable, peaceful, and almost invisible to the world. She was 8 months pregnant, her body beautifully, undeniably round. She was in a soft white linen dress, her feet bare, her hair in a loose braid. She was reading a novel, one hand resting protectively on the taut sphere of her belly. She felt for the first time in her life completely at home in her own skin. The sliding glass door opened, and Dominic came out holding 2 tall glasses of lemonade. He sat beside her, not in the other chair, but on the edge of hers, his touch immediate and instinctual. His hand came to rest on her stomach just as a tiny foot kicked against his palm. "He's active today." Dominic smiled, his eyes soft. Hannah corrected him, the familiar happy joke passing between them. "She's decided she's a soccer player." "I stand corrected." Dominic laughed, pressing his palm flat as another kick came. "She's got a strong leg. Definitely her mother's." They sat in a comfortable, easy silence for a long moment, watching the waves. Kincaid had delivered a final discreet report 2 weeks prior. Jack Mason was working at a call center in Bakersfield. He was living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment, his assets seized in the lawsuits that followed the collapse of Peterson and Cole. Tanya had vanished the day his cards were declined. The file was closed. A closed book. "Do you ever—" Hannah started, her voice soft, tracing the condensation on her glass. "Do you ever feel bad about what happened to him?" Dominic looked out at the ocean, his expression thoughtful. He was not a vindictive man. "I don't feel good about it, Han," he said finally. "I don't take joy in anyone's destruction, but I don't feel bad. I feel that actions have consequences." He turned to her, his gaze holding hers. "He made a choice. He chose to be cruel over and over. He built his entire life on the belief that he was smarter than everyone else and that kindness was a weakness to be exploited. He picked the wrong prey." He touched her stomach, his gaze softening. "He wasn't just threatening me. He wasn't just threatening my privacy. He threatened you. And he threatened her. My only job, the only one that truly matters, is to protect this, to protect our family." He threaded his fingers through hers. "I didn't ruin him, Hannah. He ruined himself. I just built the stage and turned on the lights so everyone could finally see him for who he really was." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. The old voices, Jack's voices, the ones that had lived in her head for a decade, telling her she wasn't thin enough, smart enough, or enough in any way, were finally silent. They hadn't been replaced by Dominic's voice. They had been replaced by her own. She was no longer just Hannah the ex-wife or Hannah the baker. She was a partner. She was a mother. She was finally just Hannah. And it was more than enough. She took his hand and placed it back on her belly, covering it with her own. "I love you, Dom. I love you," he whispered back, kissing the top of her head. He leaned down, his voice a soft murmur against her skin. "And I love you," he said to their daughter. The sun began to set, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and violet, and for the first time in her entire life, Hannah looked toward the future with nothing but absolute unfiltered peace. What happens when arrogance and cruelty meet quiet, unshakable power? The story of Hannah and Jack is a stark reminder that the way we treat people, especially those we think are beneath us, has consequences that can ripple out in ways we could never predict. Jack saw weakness and fat. He failed to see the strength of a mother and the protection of a man who could move mountains. Hannah found that her new life wasn't just about a billionaire. It was about finding her own worth, a worth that had nothing to do with her weight or her bank account. Thank you so much for watching. We all know someone who has been underestimated or torn down. If this story of justice and karma resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramatic stories just like this one. What did you think of Jack's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.
The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered, but not as brightly as the diamonds on the women or the contempt in Grayson Vanderbilt's eyes. He stared at the necklace his wife Annalise had worn. It wasn't Cartier, it wasn't Van Cleef, it was hers, handmade. A curious, sunset-colored stone cradled in twisted silver. He laughed a sound that cut through the polite chatter. "My dear," he said loud enough for the trustees of the Whitney to hear, "did you win that in a claw machine? Please take it off. You're embarrassing the family name." This single moment of public humiliation was not the end of Annalise's story. It was the catalyst that would ignite a fire, transforming her from a society wife into the titan of a billion-dollar empire built on the very stone he mocked. The air in the Vanderbilt penthouse on Park Avenue was always thin-scrubbed of emotion and thick with the scent of old money and white orchids. For Annalise Rosenthal, it had been a beautiful prison for 7 years. Her marriage to Grayson Vanderbilt IV wasn't a love story. It was a merger. Her family had a respectable name in academia, but no real fortune. Grayson's family, the Vanderbilts of shipping and banking fame, had a fortune so vast it was practically a character. In their lives, a demanding patriarch dictating their every move. Annalise's role was simple: be beautiful, be silent, and produce an heir. She had succeeded at the first, perfected the second, and failed so far at the third. Her quiet rebellion came in the form of a small workshop tucked away in a spare room overlooking the less fashionable side of the building. There, with a simple torch, pliers, and sheets of silver, she made jewelry. It wasn't a hobby, it was a language. Each piece was a story, a feeling she couldn't otherwise express. She'd spend hours sketching designs inspired by architectural details she'd see on her lonely walks, or the unique mineral inclusions she'd find in stones bought from obscure dealers online. It was the only part of her life that was truly hers. The piece that would end her marriage was born from a place of deep sentimentality. It was a necklace centered around a peculiar stone she had bought for $75 from an old man's stall at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. He'd called it a fluke sapphire, too strange in color to be valuable. It was a mesmerizing stone, the color of a tropical sunset, shifting from a fiery orange-pink to a soft lavender, depending on the light. It reminded her of the one happy memory she had with Grayson, a fleeting sunset they had watched in Bali on their honeymoon before the weight of his name had fully descended upon them. She framed it in a nest of hand-wrought, oxidized silver, designed to look like a thorny protective branch. It was her heart translated into metal and mineral. She decided to wear it to the annual preservation gala at the Met. It was a bold move. The Vanderbilt women, were expected to be draped in the family's vault collection, heavy historical pieces from Graff and Harry Winston that felt more like shackles than adornments. When she came down the grand staircase, Grayson's face, usually a mask of handsome indifference, tightened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and serrated. "I made it," Annalise said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "The stone reminded me of barley." His eyes went flat. "It's sentimental junk. We're going to be photographed with the Rockefellers and the Lauders tonight. You will not wear that thing. Go upstairs and put on the Bulgari sapphires." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "I want to wear this." Grayson's jaw clenched. He saw her refusal, not as a matter of taste, but as an act of defiance, a crack in the perfect facade of his life. He said nothing more, but the fury radiated from him, a cold aura that followed them into the chauffeured Bentley and through the flashbulbs on the museum steps. The humiliation, when it came, was masterful in its cruelty. They were standing in a circle with a US senator and a famous contemporary artist, Catherine Sachs. Catherine, known for her sharp eye, leaned in slightly. "Annalise, what a fascinating piece. The stone is extraordinary. What is it?" Before Annalise could answer, Grayson let out his booming laugh. It was a performance designed for maximum impact. A fascinating piece of what Catherine Annalise has a charming little hobby. She makes trinkets. He turned to Annalise, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "My dear, did you win that in a claw machine? It's sweet, but it's hardly appropriate for the Met." He then looked at the others, his smile wide and apologetic. "You'll have to forgive her. She has a creative soul. Please," he said, his voice dropping but still audible to everyone in their circle. "Take it off. You're embarrassing the family name. Put it in your purse." The air froze. The senator gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. Catherine Sachs's eyes widened, a flicker of pity crossing her face before she looked away. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye was on her, on the necklace, on her shame. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution of her identity. He hadn't just called her necklace cheap. He had called her cheap. Her one private act of creation, her one piece of herself had been held up and declared worthless. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange, chilling calm washed over her. She looked Grayson directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw something other than placid obedience. He saw a stranger. Without a word, she unclasped the necklace, its silver cool against her hot skin, and dropped it into her small beaded clutch. The rest of the night was a blur. She smiled. She nodded. She sipped her champagne. But inside, a 7-year dam of resentment and unspoken pain had shattered. She wasn't a Vanderbilt anymore. She was just Annalise Rosenthal, a woman holding a cheap stone in a ridiculously expensive purse. When they got home, the silence in the penthouse was screaming. "You will never pull a stunt like that again," Grayson began, untying his bow tie. "You're right," Annalise said, her voice even. "I won't. I want a divorce." Grayson stopped. He turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise followed by pure derision. "A divorce? On what grounds that I saved you from looking like you shopped for your jewelry at a street fair? On the grounds that I'd rather live in a studio apartment in Queens and be myself than live in this mausoleum and be your accessory." His laughter this time was genuine and far crueler than it had been at the party. "Don't be ridiculous. You have nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed it. You walk away with the clothes on your back and a one-time settlement that wouldn't cover your Neiman Marcus bill for a single season. You'll come crawling back within a month." "We'll see," she said, walking past him and towards the guest wing, where she locked the door. The Vanderbilt divorce was swift and brutal. Grayson's lawyers, a pack of sharks from Sullivan and Cromwell, painted her as an unstable, ungrateful woman. The prenup was indeed ironclad. As he had predicted, she was left with a fraction of what people assumed. The tabloids had a field day branding her the jilted jeweler. She moved out of the Park Avenue Palace and into a small, pre-war one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that her settlement barely covered for a year. The silence was no longer screaming, it was just empty. She was alone, 32 years old, with a bruised reputation and a future that was a terrifying blank slate. In her small jewelry box, amidst the few designer pieces she was allowed to keep, sat the thorny silver necklace, its sunset stone seeming to mock her. It was the reason for her ruin, or so she thought. The first few months of Annalise's new life were a study in grey. The vibrant colours of the society pages were replaced by the monochrome reality of budgeting and grocery shopping. The catered lunches were gone, replaced by toast and coffee. The stream of invitations dried up to a trickle, then stopped completely. She was a ghost in the city that had once been her stage. Her days were long and empty, the silence of her small apartment a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She sold off the designer bags and shoes. Grayson had let her keep the cash, a temporary buffer against the encroaching panic. Her gaze kept returning to the necklace. It sat on her dresser, a beautiful, painful artifact of her public execution. She hated it. She hated what it represented, her naivety, her husband's cruelty, her fall from grace. One rainy Tuesday, with her bank account dipping to a new, terrifying low, she made a decision. She would sell it. Even if it was just for the silver, a few $100s was better than nothing. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She didn't go to the flashy jewelers in the Diamond District on 47th Street. The thought of their condescending eyes was too much to bear. Instead, she remembered a small, dusty shop she'd once passed on a side street in Greenwich Village. It had a faded, hand-painted sign that read, Chadwick & Sons, Gemology and Antiquities. There was no Sons in sight, only a stooped elderly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, who looked as ancient as the artifacts in his window. She pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead. The shop smelled of old paper, metal polish, and dust. The man at the counter looked up from a loupe through which he was examining a Victorian-era cameo. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly but kind baritone. I'd like to sell this," Annalise said, her voice barely a whisper. She laid the necklace on the worn velvet counter. Her hands trembled slightly. The man, Arthur Chadwick, picked it up. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He didn't look at the silverwork first, as she expected. His eyes were immediately drawn to the stone. He turned it over and over, holding it up to the weak light filtering through the window, then under the bright, focused beam of his desk lamp. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The silver is lovely," he finally said, his gaze still fixed on the stone. "Delicate work, very organic. But this stone, where did you get this?" "A gem show in Tucson, a while ago. The seller said it was a fluke sapphire," Annalise explained, feeling the familiar sting of embarrassment. "I know it's not worth much, but I was hoping the silver—" "Not worth much," Arthur interrupted, looking at her over the top of his glasses for the first time. There was a strange intensity in his eyes. "My dear girl, the man who sold you this was either a fool or a thief who didn't know what he was stealing." He placed the stone under a microscope, fiddling with the focus knobs. He muttered to himself words like pleochroism, rutile silk, and uncharacteristic crystalline structure. Annalise stood awkwardly, assuming he was just being dramatic. After another 5 minutes, he pushed himself back from the microscope and took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Annalise, his eyes wide. "This is not a fluke sapphire. This is a Padparadscha sapphire." "A what?" "Padparadscha. It's Sinhalese for lotus blossom. They are the rarest and most valuable of all sapphires. They have a very specific, delicate balance of pink and orange. A true Padparadscha is worth more per carat than a fine diamond. But this—" He trailed off, picking up the stone again. "This is something else entirely. I've never seen one that shifts color so dramatically. It's almost as if it has the color change properties of an alexandrite, but in the Padparadscha spectrum. It moves from lotus pink to a deep, fiery sunset orange. It's a chameleon. Annalise stared at him, uncomprehending. So, it's valuable? Arthur let out a short, incredulous laugh. Valuable young lady, the Hope Diamond is valuable. A Monet is valuable. This is singular. It's a geological anomaly. It's a new classification of gemstone. A 12-carat Padparadscha of fine quality might fetch $500,000 at auction. A stone like this, with this unique documented color change phenomenon, I can't even begin to put a price on it. It's a specimen stone of museum quality. To a collector, to a house like Cartier, or a scientific institution like the GIA, this stone is priceless. Annalise felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Priceless. The man sold it to me for $75. Then today is your lucky day, Arthur said, his expression turning serious. But it's also a dangerous day. A stone like this doesn't just get sold over the counter. It needs to be certified, documented, and handled with extreme care. There are people who would kill for a stone like this. The irony was so thick, she could have choked on it. The cheap stone. The trinket she won in a claw machine. The source of her greatest humiliation was in fact a treasure of unimaginable worth. Grayson's mockery echoed in her head, but now it sounded different, not like the pronouncement of a king, but the braying of an ignorant fool. He, with all his inherited knowledge of luxury, with his family's vaults of important jewels, had stared at a miracle of nature and seen nothing but junk. He had judged its value based on its setting, not in a famous designer's platinum, but in her own humble silver. "What do I do?" Annalise asked, her mind reeling. Arthur saw the panic and confusion in her eyes. He saw the faint bruises of exhaustion under them. The expensive but slightly worn coat, the story of a woman adrift. "First," he said, his voice softening, "we get this properly documented. I have contacts at the Gemological Institute of America. We need to get a full report, a monograph. This will be its birth certificate, and it will be in your name. Annalise Rosenthal. Secondly, you need to decide what to do with it. You could sell it. A private sale to the right collector could set you up for life, for many, many lives." He paused, looking from the stone to her face. "Or you could do something else." "What else? A stone like this isn't just a commodity." Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a passion she recognized. It was the same passion she felt in her workshop. "It's a muse. It's the cornerstone of a legend. A woman who discovers a stone like this, who has the eye to see its beauty when no one else did. A woman who can craft a setting for it with her own hands. That woman doesn't just sell the stone, she builds a kingdom around it." In that dusty, forgotten shop, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's treasures, Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. But it was more than that. It was a fierce, burning sense of purpose. Arthur Chadwick hadn't just appraised her stone, he had appraised her, and for the first time since her world had crumbled, someone had seen her true worth. Selling the stone would be an ending. It would be money security, a comfortable, quiet life. It would be a final, silent victory over Grayson. But building something, that would be a beginning. It would be a roar. "Tell me more about building a kingdom," she said, her voice no longer a whisper. The decision was made. Annalise would not sell the stone. The Rosenthal chameleon, as the GIA officially named it in their stunning monograph, would not be a quick payday. It would be her seed capital, her silent partner, her statement of intent. The GIA certification process was arduous and exhilarating. Arthur Chadwick guided her through it, his connections opening doors that would have been welded shut to a woman with no industry credentials. The final report was more than a document. It was a validation. It described the stone's unique triclinic crystal system, and the trace elements of manganese and chromium that caused its unprecedented color shift, officially valuing it for insurance purposes at a staggering 18 million. The number was so absurd, it felt like fiction. Annalise, however, did not sell. Instead, she leveraged. With the GA certificate and Arthur as her venerated advisor, she secured a heavily collateralized loan against a fraction of the stone's value. It wasn't the full $18 million. No bank was that audacious, but it was enough. She walked out of a private bank, not with a check, but with a credit line of $4 million. It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. Her first move was not to rent a lavish office or hire a firm. It was to fly to Antwerp, the world's diamond capital, with Arthur. But she wasn't there for diamonds. She was there to meet the cutters, the brokers, the families who dealt in the rarest colored gemstones. Guided by Arthur, she didn't go to the big sterile exchanges. She went to the small multi-generational workshops in the back alleys, where masters who could trace their lineage back centuries still cut stones by hand and eye. She didn't buy what was fashionable. She bought what spoke to her. She bought a suite of unheated lavender spinels from Burma that glowed from within. She bought a seafoam green tourmaline from Mozambique that was so heavily included with fibrous crystals it looked like a frozen storm. She acquired a parcel of raw, uncut emeralds from a small Colombian mine, not for their clarity, but for the dramatic dark carbon gardens trapped within them. The established houses would have rejected these stones as flawed. Annalise saw them as having character. She believed perfection was sterile. The flaws were the stone's signature, its story. This became the core philosophy of her brand. She named her company simply Annalise. All caps, no frills, a declaration. Her next target was an investor. The bank loan was for materials and setup, but to build a global brand, she needed strategic capital and expertise. She set her sights on one person, Isabel Moreau, the notoriously shrewd head of Moreau Capital, a venture fund specializing in disruptive luxury. Isabel was known as the Ice Queen of Parisian finance, a woman who had built her fortune by betting on underdog brands and then molding them into powerhouses. She rarely took meetings without a seven-figure introduction. Annalise got the meeting through sheer audacity. She sent a courier directly to Isabel's office on the Place Vendôme. The package contained no business plan, no pitch deck. It contained a single perfect lavender spinel set in a simple temporary silver ring she had made herself, and a handwritten note, "Perfection is boring. Let's have a conversation about the beauty of the imperfect. Annalise Rosenthal." 2 days later, she was summoned to Paris. Isabel Moreau's office was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and grey marble overlooking the glittering jewelry houses she so often competed with. Isabel herself was in her late 40s, with razor-sharp black hair and eyes that seemed to conduct a full financial audit in a single glance. "You have 10 minutes, Isabel said, not bothering with pleasantries. The spinel sat on her desk. "Your stone is intriguing. Your method of introduction is either arrogant or brilliant. Convince me." Annalise didn't talk about profit margins or market share. She told her story. She spoke of her workshop in the Vanderbilt penthouse, a secret garden of creativity. She talked about the soul of stones, how the inclusions in an emerald were a fingerprint of the earth itself, how the subtle color variations in a sapphire told a story of its violent volcanic birth. She laid out her vision, a luxury jewelry house that celebrated not flawless cold perfection, but character narrative and the raw, untamed beauty of nature. Each piece would be one of a kind, built around a unique stone, its design an extension of that stone's intrinsic story. "The world doesn't need another Tiffany's," Annalise said, her voice steady. "We don't need another showcase of massive flawless diamonds that say nothing but, 'I'm rich.' People, a new generation of discerning women, are craving authenticity. They want a piece of jewelry that is as unique as they are, a piece that has a soul." We will not sell jewelry. We will sell talismans. We will sell stories. She finished by sliding the GIA monograph for the Rosenthal chameleon across the desk. And this is our legend. The stone my ex-husband called cheap. It will not be for sale. It will be the heart of the company, the crown jewel of our private collection, a symbol of seeing value where others see none. Isabel was silent. She picked up the spinel again, turning it in the light. She read the cover of the GIA report. She looked at Annalise, her face unreadable. The luxury market is built on heritage and perception, Isabel finally said, her tone clinical. You have no heritage. Your perception is currently that of a tabloid figure. Your ex-husband is a Vanderbilt. They could crush you with a single press release. Let them try, Annalise replied, her chin held high. They represent the old guard, the idea that value is dictated by a name brand and a price tag. We represent the new world where value is intrinsic, personal, and authentic. Their attack will only amplify our message. A slow smile spread across Isabel Moreau's face. It was the first crack in her icy facade. You are either completely insane or you are the future. I find both possibilities profitable. She stood and extended a hand. Welcome to the Place Vendôme, Ms. Rosenthal. Let's go build your empire. The next year was a whirlwind. With Isabel's backing, Annalise established her atelier not in a flashy storefront, but in a private appointment-only salon in a historic Soho loft. She hired a small team of master jewelers, artisans, who felt stifled by the rigid designs of the major houses and yearned for creative freedom. She was a demanding creative director, obsessing over every detail from the exact alloy of 22-carat gold they used warmer and richer than the standard 18K to the hand-stitched silk pouches each piece was delivered in. The first collection, Origin, was unveiled not at a splashy party, but through a quiet exclusive, showing for a handful of influential editors, stylists, and private clients. There were only 30 pieces. One was a ring featuring the storm-tossed Mozambique tourmaline, set in blackened gold, that climbed the stone like lightning. Another was a pendant with a Colombian emerald, its internal garden enhanced by a halo of tiny raw diamond crystals looking like captured dewdrops. The response was electric. The pieces were unlike anything else on the market. They were bold, emotional, and unapologetically unique. An editor from Vogue Paris called them living sculptures. A powerful high-tech billionaire known for her iconoclastic style bought 3 pieces on the spot. Annalise was born. It was a quiet birth, but the shockwaves were beginning to spread. Up on Park Avenue, in a penthouse filled with perfect orchids and passionless jewels, the news was received first with derision, then with a flicker of annoyance. Grayson Vanderbilt read a small feature on the brand in a trade magazine and scoffed. His little ex-wife was still playing with her trinkets. He had no idea that the cornerstone of her new empire was the very stone he had tried to shame her with, and that the kingdom she was building was designed to cast a very, very long shadow. The growth of Annalise was not explosive. It was a slow, inexorable burn that grew hotter with each passing season. Isabel Moreau's strategy was masterful. They eschewed traditional advertising, focusing instead on strategic placements and cultivating an air of exclusive mystique. Annalise's creations began appearing in the wild, but only on the most discerning tastemakers. The first major coup came during awards season. A-list actress Scarlett Johansson, known for her sophisticated and slightly edgy style, eschewed the usual offerings from the heritage brands. On the Oscars' red carpet, she wore a single, breathtaking piece from Annalise, a cuff earring that climbed the length of her ear, crafted from warm yellow gold and featuring a cascade of honey-colored sphene, a gemstone known for its fiery dispersion, which Annalise had sourced from a small mine in Madagascar. It was a statement. The piece was discussed on every fashion recap, praised for its originality and artistry. When reporters asked who the designer was, Johansson smiled and said, "It's an Annalise. You wouldn't know her, yet." That single quote was worth more than a $10 million ad campaign. Suddenly, "It's an Annalise" became a whisper, a piece of insider jargon among the ultra-wealthy and the fashion-forward. The brand was no longer just a curiosity, it was a phenomenon. Forbes ran a feature titled, "The Alchemist of Soho: How Annalise Rosenthal is Turning Flawed Gems into High-Fashion Gold." The article touched upon her divorce, framing the cheap jewelry story not as a humiliation, but as the brand's heroic origin myth. In the Vanderbilt sphere, the news was now impossible to ignore. Grayson first saw the Forbes article on his tablet while breakfasting on the terrace of his penthouse. His new partner, a woman named Cassandra Davenport, whose family fortune was in pharmaceuticals, slid the tablet back across the marble table. "Isn't that your starter wife?" Cassandra drawled, her voice smooth and polished. "How quaint, the alchemist of So. A bit dramatic for someone selling glorified arts and crafts. Don't you think?" Grayson forced a chuckle, but a knot of irritation tightened in his stomach. He remembered the necklace from the Met. He remembered its strange sunset-colored stone. He scanned the article, his eyes catching the valuation of her company, a speculative but nonetheless jarring number. "It's a fad. The fashion world loves a sob story. It will burn out in 6 months." But it didn't burn out. The waiting list for a bespoke Annalise piece grew to over a year. Annalise opened a second private salon in a secluded courtyard off the Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris, and a third in a discreet penthouse suite in Hong Kong. She was selective about her clients, cultivating a base of women who were leaders in their fields: artists, scientists, CEOs, and philanthropists. She wasn't just selling them jewelry, she was anointing them into a tribe. To own an Annalise piece was to signal that you had taste, individuality, and substance. It was a rejection of the kind of cookie-cutter luxury that the name Vanderbilt represented. The real shift in Grayson's perception came during Art Basel in Miami. He and Cassandra were attending the exclusive VIP preview, a sea of collectors and billionaires. Across the room, he saw an old business associate, a formidable German industrialist named Friedrich Hoffmann, talking to a woman. The woman was Annalise. She was not the timid, deferential creature he had known. She was poised, dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress. Her only adornment, a pair of earrings made from raw geometric pyrite crystals set in gold. She was laughing, holding Hoffmann's attention completely. Then Grayson saw it. On the wrist of Hoffmann's elegant wife, Helga, was a bracelet. It was a massive cuff of hammered gold, centering a single enormous seafoam green tourmaline, the very one Annalise had bought in Antwerp, the one that looked like a frozen storm. It was magnificent, a piece of primal savage beauty. It made the flawless 10-carat diamond bracelet on Cassandra's wrist look sterile and predictable by comparison. "Is that?" Cassandra began, her voice tight with disbelief. "Helga, darling?" she called out, pulling Grayson along as she crossed the room, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "What an absolutely savage bracelet! Who is the designer?" Helga Hoffmann, a woman who was famously impervious to flattery, beamed with genuine delight. "Oh, it's an Annalise, of course. She designed it just for me. The stone's inclusions are meant to represent the turmoil of the Baltic Sea near our summer home. Isn't that brilliant?" She gestured toward Annalise. "Annalise, you remember Grayson, I assume?" The air crackled. Annalise turned, her expression calm and unreadable. Her eyes met Grayson's. There was no fear, no anger, no pain. There was just a cool level assessment. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice even. "A pleasure to see you again. Cassandra." The politeness of it was more insulting than any barb. She had demoted him from a husband to a mere acquaintance. Annalise, Grayson said, forcing a cordial tone. Quite the little business you've built. I'm impressed. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Thank you, she replied simply before turning her attention back to the Hoffmans. Friedrich, you were telling me about the new Kiefer acquisition. She had dismissed him. In the heart of their world, surrounded by their people, she had effortlessly and completely dismissed him. He and Cassandra stood there for a moment suddenly, outsiders in the conversation. They were the ones left in the awkward silence. Later that night, back in their hotel suite overlooking the ocean, the facade crumbled. This is ridiculous, Cassandra spat, unclasping her diamond bracelet and tossing it on the dresser. Everyone was fawning over that woman, over her rocks and twigs. Helga Hoffman looked at my bracelet like it was from a department store. It's a bubble, Cass, Grayson said, pacing the room. But he didn't believe it anymore. He had seen the look in Friedrich Hoffman's eyes, deep respect. He had seen the genuine passion in Helga's face. Annalise wasn't selling jewelry. She was selling a new form of status, one that his money, his name couldn't easily buy. Worse, she was rewriting their history. In her narrative, he was the villain, the blind fool who cast out the princess and her magic stone. He was a footnote in her heroic rise. The thought was intolerable. The name Vanderbilt was supposed to crush others, not be a stepping stone for them. Her success is an insult to us, Cassandra continued, her voice rising. To your family. She's making a mockery of you, Grayson, and you're just letting her be. The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. He looked out at the dark ocean, his reflection a faint scowling ghost in the glass. Cassandra was right. This wasn't a game anymore. Annalise wasn't just an ex-wife with a lucky hobby. She was a rival whose very success was built on his failure of vision, on his moment of public cruelty. And a Vanderbilt does not tolerate a rival. No, he said, turning from the window, his eyes cold and hard. I'm not letting her. The irritation had now curdled into a dark, calculated resolve. It was time to remind Annalise Rosenthal what real power looked like. It was time to put the alchemist of Soho out of business. The first attack was subtle, a whisper campaign launched into the echo chamber of New York's high society. It began with Cassandra Davenport at a ladies' luncheon for the New York City Ballet. I do worry about Annalise, she'd say to a table of influential women, her brow furrowed with faux concern. She's working with such included stones. A friend in the industry told me she's essentially buying up other brands' rejects and marketing them as unique. And it's clever, I suppose, but is it honest? The poison spread. Rumors began to circulate. Annalise uses inferior quality gems. The artisanal look is just a cover for poor craftsmanship. She's a one-trick pony whose fad is about to fade. These whispers were designed to erode the most valuable asset a luxury brand has, its integrity. Annalise and Isabel Moreau saw the dip in sentiment almost immediately. A handful of tentative inquiries were quietly withdrawn. A fashion blogger with close ties to Cassandra's social circle wrote a snide post questioning the true value of Annalise pieces. This is Grayson, Annalise said, sitting across from Isabel in the Soho atelier. The city bustled below, but a chill had entered their sanctuary. This has his fingerprints all over it. He can't attack the success, so he's attacking the foundation. It's amateurish, Isabel replied, her fingers steepled, but effective in a small pond. We are not in a small pond. We ignore it. We rise above. Our work is our rebuttal. But Grayson was just warming up. When the whispers didn't work fast enough, he escalated. The second attack was a direct legal assault. Vanderbilt family lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to the Annalise headquarters. The claim was audacious trademark infringement. Grayson's legal team argued that Annalise's use of her own name, Annalise Rosenthal, was a deliberate attempt to trade on the goodwill and public recognition she had gained while married to a Vanderbilt. They demanded she rebrand her company. It was a ludicrous claim designed not to win in court, but to bleed her dry. A prolonged legal battle against a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell could bankrupt a young company, consuming time, resources, and morale. "He's trying to bury us in paperwork," Isabel fumed after a conference call with their own lawyers. "He knows he'll lose, but he'll make the process so painful that we'll be forced to settle or fold." Annalise, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. This was not a subtle whisper. This was an open declaration of war. "Fine," she said, her voice steely. "Let's fight. But we don't just fight in the courtroom. We fight in the press." Isabel's eyes lit up. A counter-offensive. They leaked the cease and desist letter to a sympathetic reporter at the New York Times. The resulting article was a bombshell. Vanderbilt heir attempts to strip ex-wife of her own name. The narrative was irresistible, the powerful old-money patriarch trying to bully his self-made ex-wife. The story painted Grayson as petty and vindictive, and Annalise as a David fighting a corporate Goliath. Public opinion, especially among the professional women who formed her client base, swung decisively in her favor. Sales surged. The lawsuit became a marketing gift. Grayson was enraged. His attempt to exert power had backfired spectacularly, making him look both weak and cruel. He was chastised by his own father, Grayson Vanderbilt III, a man who valued discretion above all else. "You made a public circus, son," the old man had rasped over the phone. "You took a private matter and aired it on the front page. Handle it. Quietly." Humiliated and furious, Grayson decided to hit Annalise where she was most vulnerable, her supply chain. This was his world, the world of backroom deals, leverage, and corporate hardball. Through his family's network, he learned the names of the small independent mines and cutters Annalise cherished. The family that supplied her unheated lavender spinels from Burma. The Brazilian cooperative that sourced her unique storm-tossed tourmalines. He dispatched agents from the Vanderbilt global conglomerate. They didn't threaten. They made offers that were impossible to refuse. To the Burmese family, they offered to buy their entire output for the next 5 years at double the price Annalise was paying, with a guaranteed distribution deal through a Vanderbilt subsidiary. To the Brazilian co-op, they offered funding for new modern equipment that would quadruple their yield in exchange for an exclusive contract. One by one, Annalise's lifelines were severed. She would call her contacts the people with whom she had built personal relationships, only to be met with apologetic, pained refusals. "Annalise, I'm sorry. The offer was too good for my family to refuse. We had to think of our future. You understand?" This blow was far more painful than the lawsuit. It was personal. Grayson wasn't just disrupting her business. He was colonizing her world, poisoning the very wells from which she drew her inspiration. The final, most crushing blow came from Antwerp. A venerable stone-cutting family, the Da Silvas, who had been instrumental in faceting her most unusual gems, sent her a formal letter terminating their relationship. They had signed an exclusive agreement with a newly formed luxury division of Vanderbilt Holdings. Annalise sat in her workshop, the letter in her hand, surrounded by sketches for a collection she could no longer produce. Her wellspring had run dry. The unique stones that were the soul of her brand were now being funneled directly into her enemy's hands. "He's not just trying to stop me," she said to Arthur Chadwick, who had come to sit with her amidst the crisis. "He's trying to become me." Arthur examined the letter. His old eyes, usually so kind, were now hard as flint. "He's a Vanderbilt. They don't create, they acquire. They see something of value, and they take it. But he's made a mistake. He thinks he's acquired your secret. He's bought your sources, your cutters. But he hasn't acquired your eye or your soul." So that evening, the industry trade publications announced the launch of a new high-end jewelry brand, Eterna, backed by Vanderbilt Holdings. Its creative director was Cassandra Davenport. Their debut collection, they announced, would feature a curated selection of the world's most unique and character-rich gemstones, a phrase lifted almost directly from Annalise's own press materials. Grayson had stolen her suppliers, her artisans, and her language. He was building a mimic, a hollow replica of her brand, but with the full weight of the Vanderbilt empire behind it. For the first time since leaving Park Avenue, Annalise felt a genuine stab of fear. She had built a beautiful, authentic kingdom. But a kingdom, no matter how beautiful, can still be starved into submission. The siege had begun. The launch of Eterna was as lavish as expected. Grayson spared no expense hosting a spectacular event at the Musée Rodin in Paris. Cassandra Davenport, draped in a massive seafoam green tourmaline necklace, cut from the same rough that Annalise had coveted, played the part of visionary creative director. The jewelry was technically proficient, the stones were magnificent, but to a discerning eye something was missing. The pieces were beautiful but soulless. They were like cover songs performed without any emotion. The designs were derivative, echoing the organic forms of Annalise, but lacking the narrative depth. It was a masterful imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. The market, however, is not always discerning. Backed by a relentless marketing budget, and the Vanderbilt name, Eterna, was an instant commercial force. They flooded magazines, sponsored events, and placed their jewelry on a new wave of influencers and actresses who were happy to take the Vanderbilt paycheck. They undercut Annalise on price, able to absorb losses that would have crippled a smaller company. Annalise's business began to feel the squeeze. Orders slowed. The buzz once hers was now shared with her corporate doppelganger. She and her team worked frantically, trying to find new sources, new stones, but Grayson's scorched earth campaign had been thorough. The niche suppliers of character-rich gems were now locked into exclusive contracts. Annalise felt cornered, the walls of her hard-won kingdom closing in. Desperation began to creep into the corners of the Soho atelier. One night, working late, she found herself staring at the framed GIA certificate for the Rosenthal chameleon, the cheap stone that had started it all. The anger and fear coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. "He's fighting a war of attrition," she said to Isabel in an emergency meeting the next day. "He thinks he can just outspend us until we die. We can't fight him on his terms. We can't win a war of resources." "So we changed the battlefield," Isabel said, her eyes glinting. "He thinks this is about jewelry. This is about... We need to find his weakness." "And what is that?" Annalise asked. "Every empire, no matter how grand, has cracks in its foundation," Isabel replied. "The Vanderbilt Empire is old, and old things can rot from within. We need to stop looking at Eterna and start looking at Vanderbilt Holdings." Isabel mobilized her own team of forensic accountants and corporate investigators, a discreet but lethal group she kept on retainer for just such occasions. For weeks they dug. They sifted through public filings, shareholder reports, and obscure trade journals, looking for leverage for a vulnerability. At first, the Vanderbilt empire seemed impregnable, a fortress of blue-chip stocks, real estate, and diversified assets. But then they found it, a small thread. Vanderbilt Holdings had heavily invested in a portfolio of shipping and logistics companies over the past decade. On the surface, it was a nod to their family's origins, but the numbers didn't quite add up. The profits reported by these subsidiaries were unusually high and consistent, almost impossibly so, given the volatility of the global shipping market. As Isabel's team dug deeper, pulling shipping manifests and cross-referencing them with customs data, a picture began to emerge. A picture of phantom cargo, of vessels listed as full that were sailing half empty, of fuel costs being artificially inflated in reports to shareholders. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a sophisticated, long-running scheme to inflate the value of the division, securing larger and larger loans against these fraudulent assets. The Vanderbilt shipping empire, the bedrock of their modern fortune, was a house of cards. And at the center of it, The one who had overseen this aggressive expansion was Grayson Vanderbilt IV. He had used this fraudulently inflated division as the financial leverage to launch Eterna. "He's been cooking the books for years," Isabel said, sliding a confidential report across the table to Annalise. "He used the illusion of profit from his shipping division to fund the war against you. If this gets out, he won't just be humiliated. He could face SEC investigation, shareholder lawsuits, and even criminal charges. The Vanderbilt name will be dragged through the mud for a generation." Annalise stared at the report. Here it was, a weapon of mass destruction. She could leak it. She could destroy Grayson, his career, his family's reputation. She could obliterate Eterna and everything he had built. The thought brought a grim, satisfying sense of justice. It was an eye for an eye. But as she sat with the power to ruin him, a conversation she'd had with Arthur Chadwick echoed in her mind. He had come to her, his face grim, when he first heard of the Vanderbilt's counteroffensive. "There's something you should know about the Vanderbilts, Annalise," he'd said, his voice heavy. "About Grayson's father. 40 years ago, I had a partner. We weren't just Chadwick and Sons, we were Chadwick and Bell. We had discovered a small but promising deposit of demantoid garnets in Namibia. It was to be our legacy. Grayson Vanderbilt III caught wind of it. He didn't make an offer. He used his financial power to squeeze our partners, fabricate a legal dispute over the mining rights, and bled us dry in court. He drove my partner, a good man, to bankruptcy and an early grave. He took our discovery, our legacy, for pennies on the dollar and sold it to a Russian conglomerate a year later. I lost everything but this small shop." Annalise had stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because my story was one of revenge," Arthur said, his gaze unflinching. "And I didn't want you to be driven by that. I wanted you to be driven by creation. But now you see, the son is just like the father. They are takers. They see beauty, and they consume it. They cannot build it themselves." The revelation recontextualized everything. Arthur's mentorship wasn't just kindness. It was a quiet 40-year-old quest for justice. He had seen in her a chance to foster the creation that had been stolen from him. Looking at the damning report in her hands, Annalise understood the choice before her. She could leak it and become a destroyer, just like the Vanderbilts. Or she could use the information in a different way. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the one who wielded it. She hadn't built her empire to burn someone else's down. She had built it to last. "We're not going to leak it," she said to Isabel, a steely calm settling over her. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Annalise, this is a kill shot." "I know," Annalise replied, "but if we leak it, it becomes a chaotic public scandal. The SEC gets involved, the business gets tied up in litigation for years. It's messy, and it makes us look vindictive. There's a cleaner way, a more elegant way. He used financial power to try and crush me. I'm going to use financial precision to cripple him." She picked up her phone and dialed her corporate lawyer. "I have a new acquisition target in mind," she said. "It's a mid-sized logistics and customs brokerage firm based in Rotterdam. They're called Viridian Global. I want you to begin the process immediately, and I want it to be quiet." Isabel Moreau stared at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face as she understood Annalise's plan. It was brilliant. It wasn't a loud, messy explosion. It was a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Annalise's counteroffensive was not a frontal assault. It was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. She didn't attack Eterna. She attacked its foundation. Working through a series of shell corporations set up by Isabel Moreau, she quietly acquired Viridian Global, a critical logistics firm controlling much of the operations at the port of Rotterdam. The day the deal closed, Viridian's new management issued a simple directive. All cargo from all clients was now subject to mandatory physical inspection. The effect on the Vanderbilt shipping division was immediate and catastrophic. The first of Grayson's ships to arrive was impounded, when its manifest claiming high-value electronics was found to be a cover for a half-empty vessel filled with scrap metal. Within a week, his European shipping operations were paralyzed, his phantom profits replaced by real-world fines. As his credit lines froze and his father's fury rained down on him, Grayson scrambled to find the invisible force strangling his business. The answer arrived in 2 emails. The first contained a meticulously detailed report on 7 years of his financial fraud. The second contained a time and an address. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Soho Atelier. When Grayson walked into the light-filled sanctuary of the Annalise headquarters, he was a defeated man. Annalise stood waiting for him, the picture of calm control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My terms are not negotiable," she stated, her voice even and cool. "First, Aeterna will be dissolved. You will transfer all its assets, including the inventory of stones you stole to me. You will pay all penalties. Second, Vanderbilt Holdings will make a substantial anonymous donation to a foundation I am establishing to support independent female designers. You will fund the very artists you sought to crush." She paused, letting the words land. "Finally, you will stay out of my world. If you ever interfere with my life or business again, this fraud report goes directly to the U.S. Attorney. Is that understood?" Defeated Grayson could only nod. He turned and walked out, a king dethroned in the quiet of his rival's palace. Months later, at the Met Gala, where her humiliation had begun, Annalise stood as a co-chair of the event. She wore a simple gown, her only adornment, a new masterpiece of her own design, with the Rosenthal chameleon floating at its center, its sunset fire captivating all who saw it. Across the room, she briefly saw Grayson, a solitary figure on the fringe of a world that was no longer his. Their eyes met for a second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the quiet finality of a war won. She had built her empire not on revenge, but on a foundation of undeniable worth. Annalise's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was a powerful testament to resilience, vision, and the radical act of defining your own worth when the world tells you that you have none. She transformed a moment of profound public humiliation into the cornerstone of a legacy, proving that true value isn't dictated by brand names or price tags, but by passion, authenticity, and an unwavering belief in oneself. Her story reminds us that the things others dismiss as cheap or flawed can often hold the most incredible world-changing potential. It's a lesson in looking closer, seeing the magic that others miss, and having the courage to build a kingdom from the stones they throw at you. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate checkmate? Was it more powerful than simply exposing him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were inspired by her incredible story of transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of incredible triumphs.